We need to write in the calendar. Because all right, people, we are live. I said 4:40, they are.
Henry, okay. Can you all see me as I'm hiding behind those of you?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Welcome to Youth Literature and the Latinx Diaspora. I want to thank, first, you know who I am. My name is Carla España. I am one of the faculty members in the Department of Puerto Rican and Latino Studies. We want to thank the Global Institute for Humanities for co-sponsoring this with us, and we have a list of other folks who are always supporting our work. The Maria Sanchez Center for Latino Studies, our Office of Diversity and Equity Programs, our Childhood Bilingual Special Ed Department, the CUNY Haitian Studies Institute, our Children and Youth Studies English Department, hoping they're signing all these books, and Caribbean Student Union and our Puerto Rican Alliance. We have representatives here, so we're so grateful for everyone who's joining us in person, and those, I know we're a commuter campus. We have students who work a lot and people taking classes, and so I know people are online joining us or watching this later. So first, I wanted to introduce you to our faculty. You might see their names, but maybe sometimes you haven't seen their faces. And then we're just starting with introductions, so come on in, Ibi Zoboi in the house, yes, come on in, woo! You get all these applause too, we can do that one by one too. So our faculty have experience in so many different areas, from digital archives to the arts, and you may have taken courses with some of these instructors. Raise your hand if you look familiar, yes. Manuel, was that your intro course with one of these? Yes. Hopefully you recognize some of us. We're in the room too. So Professor Aja, where are you? Hey, you can do a little intro, Professor Aja?
No.
Which one's fine?
It was only nice to be here. I wanted to be in your presence.
Camille.
Thank you, Professor Aja. We also have Professor Carla Santamaria. You've probably taken some courses, if you're into, your music and talking about Puerto Rico and music, and you probably were at the events with Reggaeton con la Gata that we had earlier in February, or if you follow Reggaeton con la Gata's platform of the Perreo 101 tour. We had here with Professor Santamaria. Professor Mena, where are you? Professor Mena's photographer today too. And maybe you take classes with Vanessa Santiago or Dr. Maria Perez Gonzalez in the past, or you've seen them, or maybe Professor Laura Pavon or Orlando Morales. We have a great team here to support you, and I just wanted to give a little intro on the context of where this event fits in. The context starts with a very powerful history for this department of Puerto Rican and Latino Studies. You may have been hearing about a lot of the ethnic studies challenges and bans in this country. That is not anything new, and we're very familiar with it here on this campus. There's a beautiful documentary called Making the Impossible Possible that documents the way that the Department of Puerto Rican and Latino Studies began on our campus, and it was through student activism and solidarity across groups on campus. So we have to keep those lessons in mind as we keep getting challenges in the present time. So we had a film screening of that documentary, as well as We Still Here, Nos Tenemos, that documented the comerío in Puerto Rico and the resiliency and advocacy of Puerto Ricans on the island rebuilding. And it was beautiful to see our former students involved in both of the documentaries. So this is where we started in the fall. This is the event we had with Professor Santamaria and Evies on the Perreo 101 tour. And so that's been documented online. And this brings us to today. So where are we going with this event and these conversations, and where does this conversation fit into the larger conversation we're having in this country? So one of the conversations we've been having in this country and in our classes, so hopefully if you've taken Puerto Rican Latino Studies courses here, we talk a lot about identity, and we talk a lot about how people self-identify, what labels people place on us, and what labels we want to place on ourselves. And this is the most recent that we're most concerned about, is the conflation of race and ethnicity as a potential change in the upcoming census. And so we urge you to check out the website, Latino is not a race. Latino is not a race, and you have all the resources there to get informed as to what are those potential changes, and you can take action by commenting and sending a comment to the Office of Management and Budget to talk about how, by conflating that, the population that get most affected are Black, Afro-Latino, Latino populations. So that's something we've been talking about and something that's coming up. Along with that, a lot of you might recognize some of these images from your classes. Recently, Professor Tania Hernandez published the book Racial Innocence, and talking about anti-Blackness within the Latinx community. Or hopefully you're familiar with the poet Alan Perez Lopez and how they have been discussing their own experience as being indigenous Mexican from Oaxaca, and talking about how their experience growing up in Oaxaca and experiencing how they've been received or not in different parts of Mexico, and then in the U.S., or maybe Feliz Leon, even following Feliz Leon and watching these videos on the route on especially what are the artists that get celebrated, who are the artists that get celebrated, what's the music that gets celebrated, who gets appropriated, and who gets appreciated. So these are some of the conversations we're having. And most recently, maybe you've seen our reports. The American Library Association just released this week the latest stats on censorship and book bans. And you see this graphic on from last year's 2021 to 2022, and you see like the most shaded colors of the books that have been banned across the country. Don't ignore New York, because we just had a recent incident with violence at a school. We've had recent incidents of, I remember in Long Island last summer, I was on social media and I see that there's a Pride Month beautiful display at a library in Long Island, and a few folks complained and it was removed. So they opened it up for comments, and I was there commenting, making sure we had to get this display back up, and they put it back up. But this is happening across the country. And I think it was Edgar who asked me about this in class last week, so I'm thinking of you. So these are the stats the American Library Association just released this week. We had, in this past year, 1,269 attempts to ban or restrict library materials, 2,571 unique book titles that were targeted in 2022, and just look at that graph on how the numbers spiked, right? From 2003, very low numbers, to all the way up 2022, 1,269. So, that brings us to this department. We are an ethnic studies department that's sponsoring and facilitating this event. And we are very concerned, not just because we want to be in solidarity with the folks in other parts of the country or other parts of the state, but we want to make sure that the history is not forgotten for how this department came about, and make sure that we continue in solidarity and being informed as to how we can keep growing our department and not forgetting the struggles of our past students and activists to make sure this department exists. So when I thought about these authors and I thought about the classes you're taking and all the amazing faculty and work you do, I wanted to make sure that you have books to help you through all these topics. And these authors, poets, amazing writers are helping us process all of this in different ways, through different stories. And so I'm going to stop my context, a little intro, and now just want to give you a little intro to who is here. We have two more authors joining us about, in about like 10 minutes, so don't worry, we'll have the whole group. And then after I give this intro, I'm just going to ask, we'll start the conversation with, if you can tell us a little bit about your latest project, if it's something that's on here, or if I didn't get the advanced copy of like Nigeria Jones, you can tell us a little bit about that book. So we have Camille Gomera-Tavarez. We have copies of High Spirits, which is translated to Spanish by Lorraine Avila, who's on her page. So you'll hear a little bit. And you have all the bios right there as well in front of you. We have poet, author Elisabet Velasquez. Some of you may be familiar with the book, but maybe you recognize it in Spanish because you read it for a class last semester. And so we'll hear a little bit from Elisabet. And we have Ibi Zoboi. Some of you may be familiar with Ibi Zoboi because we have, like, you write for different ages. So you may be familiar with the People Remember as a picture book. You may be familiar with some middle grade, but there's young adult novels. And so I'm going to pass it over. I think that was enough of an intro. You have a little bit of a context of why they're here, why all of these books matter in the work that we do. And so if you can just begin telling us a little bit about what your latest project is about. So we get a little summary. As folks at the end, you can come and grab a book and read the book. Okay, so, woo, yeah. Oh, last but not least, can't forget, the reason why we have books is because we love their authors and he sends us copies. And so shout out to Lorraine Avila for our copies of and High Spirits. Shout out to Penguin Random House for When We Make It. Flatiron, right, for Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed. Also, Penguin sent the My Life as an Ice Cream Sandwich and copies of the very creative, innovative. I want to hear more about this because I'm interested too in your Octavia Butler biography in verse. What? Mind blowing. Okay. I know. See, now you're like, I want to read that too. It's tough to pick a book. So thank you all. Round of applause for our speakers. We'll start with you on that side.
All right. Thank you, Dr. España, for inviting me. These are my stomping grounds. I lived in Flatbush for many years, and I know not too far is Little Haiti. So I'm always thankful to come back to CUNY. I attended Hunter College. I used to go to parties and spoken word events and lectures at City College, here in Brooklyn College, Medgar Evers College. So I'm always appreciative of CUNY. I always like to say, I said it recently, there's like HBCU, there's PWIs, and then there's CUNY, right? We don't talk enough about CUNY and what it means for the country and all the activists and scholars who taught at CUNY schools. I could name them, but I think you can do your research to find out who are teachers, who were some of the scholars here. So thank you again for inviting me. And I also want to say, being invited into the Latinidad spaces, I personally don't say that I identify as Afro-Latinidad, but understanding how anti-Blackness works in Latinx cultures, I will come when I'm invited, but I won't invite that identity to me. Do you have anybody tissue?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my latest, I do write, I see some familiar faces here. Hi. I do write in different genres so that I can continue to work. I make sure that I don't pigeon myself into the immigrant narrative all the time. I wasn't trying to write about the immigrant experience when I first published, but that's what they wanted, so it was a way in. I have various experiences, and just growing up in New York City, watching sci-fi on TV, just loving hip hop, and wanting to say something about the country that's not just set in New York or Brooklyn. So I have stories set in Detroit. And my latest book is set in Philadelphia. It is called Nigeria Jones because I'm saying something about the African American identity. My character is Haitian. She's half Haitian and half Black American. And I am saying something about the intersection of the American Revolution and the Haitian Revolution. Her father is a Black nationalist. He's sort of an activist. If you're familiar with the term hotep, which is, I consider, a derogatory term, her father's sort of like a hotep who has these somewhat outdated views on race, but is very, very political and really believes that the Constitution should apply to him as well. So one of the things that he has his daughter do is go to the shooting range and know how to, and it's a sensitive topic now, but we don't usually talk about Blackness and their relationship to the Second Amendment, especially politically minded, militant Black people. So this is her family. She's homeschooled, vegan, and is considered, her community is African-centered. I am not making this up. This is very much a part of American identity. So she grows up vegan, homeschooled, and learning how to shoot a rifle, and her mother disappears. I won't give it away. And she finds out that her mother wanted her to attend a very elite school, which happens to be a Quaker school in Philadelphia. So begins her journey to finding identity and figuring out what her purpose is and what her freedom is. So what does it mean when your father is fighting for freedom for a collective people, but within your family and within your community, you don't have freedom as a Black girl? And there are themes of Black maternal health issues, just hippies, Black hippies exist. And it is a nod to the MOVE organization in Philadelphia. Thank you so much. I'll take that tissue. Yes. Sorry. Allergies.
I know, I'm with you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Ibi, for that. So
Bushwick.
I know. I'm like,
Bronx is coming to like help
facts. Bronx is definitely here. I am so happy to be here. It's always really dope to be back in Brooklyn. I moved to Jersey City 3 years ago. I've been in Brooklyn my whole life. And I mean, don't stone me because I'm in Jersey City.
I'm in Jersey.
Okay. I know. I'm always like scared to be to say that. But I got priced out. That's the reality. I would love to come back to Brooklyn. We were just talking about this, but I can't afford it. And hopefully we can all make enough money to buy back the block. But, until then, we are representing however we represent. And that's what I try to do in my life. That's what I try to do with my work. And that's where When We Make It came from. I wrote a novel in verse based in Bushwick, Brooklyn. That's where I was born and raised. And I knew that this was a story that I wanted to tell my whole life. And when I got the opportunity, I was like, I'm gonna do it. And it was really funny because I had been writing this book because I had been living this book, but I didn't really have it all kind of like together. It was in my bones. It lived in my bones, but it was kind of scattered. And I started performing poetry. I've been writing poetry since I was 9, but I started performing poetry at the New Rican Poets Cafe. Shout out to the New Rican Poets Cafe. I started in 2009, and then I made the team, and then I just kind of been performing poetry, and then I took that over to the online spaces, and I started posting my poems on Instagram, because I also was just very impatient and didn't really want to wait for validation or to get published by somebody. And I was just like, I could publish myself. And that was kind of my first, go around with publishing. But so I started posting, and my publisher found me on Instagram and reached out to me. And I thought it was a prank because I was like, these things don't happen to girls like me, right? That's what? You want to meet with me? You want to talk about a book? And so I Googled because I was like, you're not going to catch me out there. And she was real. And I was like, oh, my God, now I got to show up in a different way, in a way that believes that she can do things that people have previously said she can't. And we met, and my publisher was like, yo, you got a book? And I was like, yeah, I got a book. But I didn't have a book. I had 40 pages. But I grew up having to show up in a very particular way. I had to hustle. You had to have your game face on. You can't let people know, kind of what you're going through. And that was kind of the process to making When We Make It. And I wanted to write about those experiences. I wanted to write against this narrative of overcoming that I often found in a lot of books, where it was like, you can only make it if you come from a certain background and then you graduate college, right? And it was like, that wasn't my experience, and I still fucking made it. Like, I was making it every day that I was alive. And so I wanted to kind of talk to that idea of what it is that we view as successful. And, the reality is that I saw so many successful people in my neighborhood in Bushwick in the 90s. But those stories weren't really being told as being successful. They were being told as struggle. And it was like, when my mom was on the pantry line, right, and getting us food, that was successful as fuck. That was a vision of a successful woman who was making it work, who was making it. And so I wanted to make sure that I was telling those stories, that all of the characters in my book kept their humanity, because we've had our humanity stripped of us for enough, and we don't need to do that shit in literature. So the story follows a young girl, Saraciea, growing up in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and she's trying to figure out what being successful means, what making it means. And we kind of go on this journey with her and her family, and we kind of see how each of the characters are defining success or are having success kind of imposed on them as a definition. And I'm like, Ibi, I don't want to give away too much. But it is a story that is very near and dear to my heart. And, I named it When We Make It, because we're making it. But it was also like a low-key, like Frank Sinatra, like, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere kind of thing. But that's kind of where that came from.
Thank you. I know we have, thank you. Yes, we have, some of the students are here that we had a book club. We're reading it in Spanish, and we started just like a few of the poems together. Are you here? Who's here? Then we had Erika's here, Inez. That was a lot, right?
That was a lot. Everybody cried.
Everybody cried. Like it was an emotional. Like, we went in, and then because we were in a class thinking about how we can use literature to process our own lives as teachers, and then how we can make sure we create spaces for children to use literature to process their lives. So all of you do that really well. So thanks for the students who are reading it with me, so I'd have to read it but myself. Yes, go ahead.
It was great hearing from both of you. I was just nodding along. But I actually have a very similar story to Elisabet, except that I graduated college 2019, and for my thesis project, I went to art school in Maryland, and so I had a graphic design thesis, and then I had a creative writing thesis, and my writing thesis just had to be like an essay or like whatever. But I was like, I'm just going to make like a chapbook and like make this a whole book thing. And I was more excited about that than like my design thesis. It came more easily to me. But it started from a workshop class I was in where I submitted a story, and everyone in the workshop seemed to be really engaged with it. It was based off of my father, who when I was young would tell me stories, growing up sort of in the southernmost part of the Dominican Republic, close to the border with Haiti. And when he was little, my grandma would tell me stories about how he would get possessed as a child, and like how she had this like book of herbs and like all this stuff. And like my dad would tell me too, like about how he would just sort of like black out and like just like come to and like not know where he was. So I was like, that sounds like a basis for a story. And like, so I sort of wrote about this character that had this affliction as an adult. And what would happen to him when he would black out? Where would he go? Why was he doing that? Like, is there a trauma inflicted with it? And like bringing it back to like this setting very similar to my grandparents' house, which I would go to a lot as a kid in the Dominican Republic. So I found that through writing that and through finding sort of like the link to like magical realism, which I was like really getting into at the time, it seemed to really be engaging with people. And I find like the more specific you get with like your stories or whatever, the more sort of universal it is, especially the other people in the class that were immigrants or were from different places. So then I started writing more stories, and then I sort of saw that they were all sort of in the same universe, kind of, and they were all dealing with similar themes of like belonging, and some of them had magic in them and some not. So I sort of put them together and made them all part of the same family. So I wrote about 5 stories for my thesis, and then I graduated in 2019. I started working for a little bit, and then 2020 came, and I was like, my goal for this year is to just like get published like in a magazine or get published somewhere, just one story or like one thing somewhere. And then pandemic happened, yay. So then I was like, you know, like same as you, like I'm not gonna wait around for like someone to like accept me. I'm just gonna make my own things. So instead of doing my stuff, I started like an online magazine that I called Plantain. I just got a bunch of my art friends, and I was just like, the books that I relate to, I never really relate to other books that were like sort of presented to me by Latino authors. There was always just like some sort of anti-Blackness, some sort of like just difference in you know, societal standing that I could read through the book. I could feel that like, oh, like you haven't dealt with like the machismo in this, you haven't dealt with the Blackness in this. So the books I related to more were books from like you know, African immigrants or like Black immigrants, Caribbean immigrants. And those were where I sort of saw myself, you know, growing up. So I wanted to sort of start that initiative and make that magazine, and that was exclusively for Black immigrants, just because I wanted to read them. I was just like, if y'all are struggling to get published, I was like 22, 23 years old, but like just send it to me. I have graphic design skills, which are scammer skills. These people that things are legit, so it looked like a magazine. But we got a lot of like great submissions and stuff, and after I started just sort of like putting that work out there and like creating those opportunities, a publisher reached out to me and was like, hey, I saw your website. We were looking for like illustrators, designers like me, but I saw that you had this book, which was my thesis project, and he really liked the cover, so he was just like, I'm kind of interested if you want to send me some chapters. And I was just like, okay. I was like, this is legit. I mean, I looked it up too. I did my Googling. And I was just like, okay, like they have some, you know, heavy hitters in their roster or whatever. And my publisher specifically, like, sort of, they previously were at Scholastic and now sort of champion, you know, uplifting diverse voices and specifically like Latino voices. So I was just like, oh, that seems like a good fit for me, I guess. But I sent him the chapters and he was like, this is really good. I was like, I know, I can't get it published anywhere. I was like, that's what I've been saying. Like, but we just really vibed and we talked about it a lot, and it was like eventually, he grew up in like the town next to where I grew up from, which don't hate me, but I grew up in New Jersey, in Passaic County. A couple of the stories take place in Paterson, New Jersey as well. So we had sort of commonality in like knowing the settings of some of the things that I was talking about. And then he was like, do you want to maybe write some more and make this a book? And then he gave me a deal, and then we're here. And I got to like design the book and be really hands-on. It was almost sort of like an internship or a fellowship into like the whole publishing process, coming just out of college. I didn't even know like what a query letter is, like anything about publishing at all. So it was all just a big learning experience. And yeah, I'm happy with the way that it turned out. And it's more about the book is that it's a short story collection. There's like a family tree in the beginning, and each story sort of follows a different family member at a different point in time. So we see like the grandparents and they're growing up. We see, you know, the first story that I was talking about, stories of kids in like high school, and the different ways that they do that. Also very related to a lot of stories from my family. So it is very personal to me, and I read about that too a little bit. But yeah, and my family is sort of spread out in like Spain and like the Caribbean. You know, I have some family in Africa and stuff. So it was really just relating that like, even though this is one family and they're like spread out, like they have similar experiences in terms of like belonging and the ways that they deal with being an immigrant in different ways. So yeah, that's High Spirits. I'm excited if you guys want to read it. And the Spanish version is also translated by Lorraine. Right?
Great transition. Look, you did the transition for me. Look, thank you for
Hi, everyone.
We're just sharing your latest.
Oh, cool. Well, I wrote The Making of Yolanda la Bruja. It's out April 11th. And yeah, it's about a Black Dominican girl from the Bronx who's also deaf and queer and is having these visions during her family, like while she's being initiated into her family's traditional practices and religious practices. She's having these visions about this white boy essentially causing harm to the school. And she doesn't know how to like use her voice to express like, I'm having this fear, this thing might happen, like, you're gonna beat me. And it really came from a place where I was a teacher for 10 years, specifically taught some years in Brooklyn. And yeah, I was a teacher in a desegregated school, meaning there were Black, brown, white kids in the same spaces, which we know is not the norm in public schools in New York or anywhere. And so there was a lot of violence after the 2016 election, specifically from like this minority group of white children who decided to like be really expressive about their right-wing views. And when like Black and brown girls specifically were saying like how they were like feeling some type of way about the things that were being said in class, or like about not being able to like express their disdain with what was being said, it took admin a really long time to actually hold these kids accountable. And the last thing they did that actually was the evidence we needed was that they went around like posting like social justice is cancer on like these posters that had a lot to do with like feminism and like anti-Blackness. And so, yeah, this book really came from that place of like having to hold space for a lot of my students who were feeling very like voiceless and unheard. And yeah, I think like sadly it speaks to a lot of things we are seeing the world go through. But essentially it's about a girl from the Bronx finding her voice and no matter what, trying to protect her community. And so there's a lot of joy and fun parts in it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Oh, got it. Welcome. So while we do that transition, yes, so we just started talking about your latest work, or this is the one that we got copies of. So everybody copies of. So Teresia J. Fennell is here.
Yes, hi everyone. So sorry about my tardiness. But yeah, so my name is Saraciea J, now pronouns she, her. I am a Black Honduran American writer from the Boogie Down Bronx. And it's important to say that because there's not a lot of stories about the Bronx, but also equally not a lot of stories about Honduran Americans or really underrepresented Central Americans. And that was kind of sort of the reason why I decided to do Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed. It is a nonfiction collection. And as you can see, I am Black. There's not a lot of Black Latina writers being published today. And so the collection is hyper-focused on those marginalized voices, including Black queer writers, Indigenous writers, and also writers who just felt like, you know, you could be from a Latin American country, but don't necessarily have to fit in to the Latinidad box, right? And so a lot of the collection is subverting a lot of stereotypes and myths. We're talking about a lot of topics that are probably considered taboo, that maybe some of your folks in your family would probably tell you not to talk about, like colorism and anti-Blackness. In my essay in particular, I talk about bleaching cream, and that kind of set so many people on fire within my own family, like, oh, you're spewing lies. And I'm like, is it a lie? No, I don't think so. But just really, you know, thinking about identity and how you want to identify in the world, but also the importance of knowing the history of where you're from, because I think that's really important. Evie is actually in the collection, and one of her pieces is one of my favorite, and I always get the question of, why is there a Haitian writer in this collection if, you know, they're not part of they don't identify as Latinx or Latina. And I'm like, well, technically they are a Latin American country. So you should read her essay and understand why, she has decided to contribute her voice to this collection, but also identify as Haitian, which is really important. In my essay in particular, Half In, Half Out, Orbiting a World Full of People of Color, I talk about growing up in Brooklyn and East New York and being from there and being around people who look like me, but then ending up in foster care, being with white people, and just really understanding that my norm wasn't the norm. That's not really how the world looks, even though white people like to say that like we don't exist, right, in this world. And so it was a very interesting displacement for me. But then I started to wonder, like, where am I from? What is my identity? So I ended up moving out of those white folks' homes and moving in with family members. They are Honduran, but also Puerto Rican. And so in the Bronx, huge Puerto Rican population. And so my cousin kind of introduced me around. And I remember one of her friends asking, what is she? And she's like, oh, she's the same thing as me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm the same thing as her, whatever she is. And so she said she was Honduran and Puerto Rican, and that's how I identified for a while until, of course, one of my family members corrected me and said, actually, she is Honduran and Puerto Rican because her dad is Puerto Rican, you are not, you are this. But it was really interesting to me because that's when I really started to understand what identity was. And I started to do a lot of research into my own family and found out that we are a part of an indigenous group in Honduras, Garifuna people. And so I started to research that and wonder, what is this about? And so it's just really important to me that it was a nonfiction collection and not fiction, because we have a lot of wonderful fiction written, but I think people tend to believe that fiction stories are like the actual author's, background. So I said, why not just make the collection nonfiction? And it's been a wonderful conversation starter. I know definitely within my own family, like we've talked about how my white Latinx cousins didn't have that conversation of putting on bleaching cream. They were kind of told, go put some baby oil on and sit in the sun when we went to the beach, where I was kind of told, don't do that. You don't need to get any darker. And so just having these conversations, also talking about mental health, suicide ideation, which is huge among Latina girls, something that's not really talked about, but I have family members that have experienced that personally. There's also other pieces in there talking about agency, but various different things. I feel like there's something in there for everyone, and I really tried to bring together voices who I thought through personal conversation over the years had something really important to say, but also would just, do a wonderful job subverting some of those stereotypes, or also talking about topics that people were probably, I didn't know about that.
Thank you so much. I think in the intro course or the Puerto Rican, Caribbean, Latinx child course, students have read your essay, they read Ibi's essay, they read Mark's essay. So, I wanted to sign off. Can't get too much homework. So I know we'll definitely have some questions from students and a little bit about those essays. So I wanted to just get us started with a conversation around your writing process and what that looks like for you, because we have students who are not only, writing papers for classes, but they're writing their stories. And so sometimes it's how do you make that shift from I'm writing a research paper to then I want to write the story of my life, or I want to take this inspiration like you all shared. And so, what does the writing process look like for you? What's your writing space feel like, look like? I follow all of you on social media, and so I have a sense. So that's what you should all do, is follow. So does that change for you across time? Does it change depending on the genre that you're writing? So what might that look like? And we can start.
I'll speak about my writing process for The Making of Yolanda. I was teaching in San Francisco and kind of teaching a group of students how to write a fiction story. We had been writing essays mostly for test prep, but then I wanted to give them some space to get into fiction. And we started off with creating a character, and I started modeling this girl named Yolanda for no reason. I was just thinking about my mom, one of my mom's best friends, her name is Yolanda. And so I thought this story was going to be a story that had a lot more to do with my mom's best friend, but and so like we just started off with like characteristics, what do they look like, who are their like closest family members, or like then we got into theme and like what is actually driving the story and like what is the character like learning through this process / plot. And so at one point after the unit was over and everyone had written their stories, I was like, actually I'm like attached to Yolanda. And so I started writing deeper into her story. And I was at the gym, I remember. So this is essentially how I start writing stories. I think I just like get like one line. And I remember she was like in my head while I was at the gym talking about like how she hated walking or running or doing anything physical because like her boobs were so big and they've been so big since she was like X amount, like she was like 12, like before she even hit puberty, and like having all these feelings around her chest. And I remember like that night I went home and wrote like 6 or 7 pages, and I was like, oh my God, this is really gonna be like a YA novel. And so that's how I went around Yolanda. Like I think I started with like this very like structured process as I was teaching students. And you know, with other projects, I think they take on their own life, but or another format. But I would say like for YA, at least for me, I think I like the idea of starting off like, who is this character? Like, let's start building it, and then like thinking about like what are they like, how do they feel uncomfortable, and like what are the challenges around them. And so yeah.
For me, definitely less regimented like writing process. I always like, if I don't feel like writing, like then it's just not gonna happen. Like, I don't really, vibe with like you have to like write every day kind of a thing. Just doesn't work for me. For me, I feel like for every story in the collection, they have its own like story in terms of like the background of like what inspired me and like how I got certain things. But mostly it was like taking like a memory or something. Or just like if I was needing like, some inspiration, I'll just call my mom, put it on speakerphone. She just like goes on and on. I don't even have to say anything. She just keeps talking. Or I'll just like go to another family member and be like, just like tell the story. And it was like really, eye-opening to like find out more about myself and my family, and like also learn to like ask questions. So I feel like as kids you're kind of like afraid to ask, or like you're just supposed to like sort of know like who that is or like who this person is. So I got a lot of family tea from it, a lot. And then also like seeing, okay, that's like this thing that happened. Is this a thing that like happens to other people? Is this a thing that's like a little bit more universal? And like why does it happen? What is like the societal stuff? For this book in particular, most of the themes go back to like toxic masculinity. So whenever I was like lost, I would be like, okay, what is this angle of like toxic masculinity? Like how would this affect like, if there's not any men in the room, like how does toxic masculinity show up then? If it's like a queer sapphic relationship, how does toxic masculinity still happen to show up? And sort of using that to guide maybe like how the story might be going. Even for one like that takes place, it's called Barbaro, which is like play on words because it's like a word that Dominican use a lot, and then also has the word barber in it. That takes place at a barber shop, and it's about a little boy who has long curly hair, and he doesn't really want to cut it. His mom like just works at a salon, has a lot of sisters, but then his older brother comes down and is like, you have to like get a haircut because we have to like look nice, like festival day, and everyone has to look nice. And he doesn't really want to do it, but he takes him to the barber anyway, and the barber is a little more like hotep, like you was saying earlier. And then he sort of talks a little bit more to the kid, and then is sort of talking to the brother, and he's like, do you want to get a haircut? He's like, no, I don't want to get a haircut. And he's just like, oh, I'm not going to cut his hair. And then they have sort of an altercation with the brother. But that came about because I just was talking to my brother about growing up and like the ways that I noticed that I was treated differently than he was in certain ways, but also trying to like have empathy and be like, one time my dad made him like scalp his hair because he got in trouble once, and I remember he left and went to the barber and came back, and like just the sadness in my brother's eyes was like something that really stuck with me. So like I asked him about it, And, you know, we have different interpretations of, like, what abuse looks like, you know, with our own parents. But just, like, hearing him talk about it and, like, having that conversation with him was really a spark for the story. And then, like, I looked up and I was like, this is, I feel like a greater issue that happens with boys and men in the way, especially, like, Black boys and brown boys, that there's a sort of tough love upbringing. And how might that, like, translate to a grander theme in the story. So making sure that, like, everything sort of has intentionality and, like, the different elements that are in the story are all sort of pointing to, like, the same intention and goal, I feel like is something that helps a lot.
I'm so glad you shared that one because that's one of my favorites. Like, I was there. I the conversation, this is so beautifully written. So thank you for sharing that as an example.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I just went through something like that with my own son. His hair is very important to him, and I think it's something that we don't really see in books a lot, like Black and brown boys and their hair. You see it for Black women and what their hair means to them, but not necessarily for Black boys. So I'll make sure he reads that story. But my writing process is kind of shifted over the last couple of years thanks to the pandemic. I work in publishing full time, so for me I would write at home, but you know, I've been working remotely for the last 3 years, and so I'm not as creative at home anymore. It's like, what is writing? But
a lot of videos of interviews with you online, so that's great.
Yes, there's a lot of those. I do love that, but I feel like my process now is this gestation period. Like, that is what's happening at home. I'm constantly thinking about characters, thinking about world building and like what I want to put into my stories. And I actually spoke about this before, but I do a lot of video journaling, which is really fun, or sending myself voice notes. So I could be out grocery shopping, I could be, you know, on the toilet, I could be in the shower, I bring my phone with me everywhere, I'm listening to music on it and stuff like that. Oh, let me pause and like record this sentence, or this would be a cool title of an essay, or a cool title for a short story, or this character needs to look like this, and I, you know, start to form them. And then when I finally have time to write, which is usually in the wee hours after the household has shut down and my brain is still, you know, thinking creatively, I sit up and I'll write a couple of pages, or if I'm going out on writers retreats, which I highly recommend, and you know, anyone can go on a writer's retreat. It can be by yourself. It could be a solo one. You can invite a few friends that like to write. I highly encourage it. I feel like so much magic happened at retreats, and it's just a really fun way to be in community with other people, but also to just sit with yourself if you're going on a solo one, and to only think about the stories that have probably been sitting with you and living with you for a really long time. So that's sort of my process. But in regards to how I kind of like to think about my stories when it's nonfiction, I turn the lens internally and think about what are the things that I have always been told not to talk about. Right? And I put that on paper. So all of the questions, all of the experiences that I have had, because I'm pretty sure there are other young people in the world who have probably been told the same thing, or are really scared to talk about those topics just because of the way the culture is. It's like, we don't talk about these things. You know, mom and dad, they're sick, but we don't call the thing what it is. So I tend to think about topics like that when it comes to my nonfiction work. When it's my fiction work, I have been told that I am kind of stuck in that 15, 16-year-old voice, and I love talking about family dynamics. So all of my stories usually will center lots of females or like really big families. And also my safe space is the bathroom in my real life. I come from a very big family, and the only time I ever got to be alone was in the bathroom. It's like, I'll be right back. I didn't even have to use the bathroom. It was just a place I went to be like, I'm gonna sit back here and give it a second. And so I tend to put those things into stories, and I kind of think about like, what kind of conversations can you have in the bathroom, right? I read a lot of books and things take place like in the kitchen or in the living room, but like there's some really interesting stuff that happens in the bathroom, right? Like if you're a girl, you get your period there, you have all of these conversations. If you're a mom, if I'm writing like older stories, all of your kids are coming into the bathroom, they're banging on the door. There's just so much chaos happening in the bathroom, and I just find it as a really cool place. So if you read a lot of my stories really closely, you'll notice there is a bathroom scene in almost every single one, because it's just a special place for me, and I'm like, I'm going to make some stuff happen here.
And can you tell us the community of writers that, the Honduran Garifuna writers?
Yeah, so I specifically started that community because I was in grad school and I was really interested in trying to write fantasy stories, but specific to the Honduran Garifuna group of people, and I couldn't really find anything, and I got really upset. And so I said, well, there has to be other fiction writers. So I looked and didn't really find any. I said, okay, poets, like what category, like where are they? And they're pretty much non-existent. And so I was looking for this community and decided, well, I'm just going to go ahead and create it myself, which I encourage all of you that if something is lacking, if it's non-existent, you should very much feel empowered to create that community yourself. And so I put a call out on social, and we started to gather virtually. And one of the things that a lot of the writers have said is, I've been searching for community like this for years. I didn't realize how many of us were out there. There are a lot of self-published Garifuna writers. There are a lot of self-published Honduran writers. So in those meetings, we talk a lot about how do you break into the publishing industry, right? But also, why would you want to break into the publishing industry? Because they've self-published for so long. There's like pros and cons to it, right? And so I, have real conversations with them about, well, is it you want to spend your time writing and promoting, which you still do as a traditionally published writer, but it's a little bit different because you're not the sales and distribution person. You do have to promote your work, right? There's this level of promotion where you're like, okay, my book's going out. I have to tell people about it. I have to talk about it, but you don't have to spend every waking hour talking to someone about your book, but then also trying to get them to buy the book, right? And because that's like your livelihood. So we have real conversations about that. It's like, do you want to join the capitalism, and do this? Or is it, I would just want complete control of my work, and I want to be paid for my work, but I also don't really want to have to worry about pitching, distributing, promoting. And so we talk about the pros and cons, but for me, I have my own agenda where I want the publishing industry to pay attention to marginalized writers. I was just talking to someone about the Latinx canon, and I was like, yeah, there's some really fantastic writers, but can you point out the Panamanian, the Honduran, I was like, where are all of these marginalized writers within the community? And they're all like, okay, I guess we don't have enough writers at the table. I'm like, we really don't? So yeah, so that's kind of the community, and I have something exciting happening this summer, still in the works, but we're going to be launching a mentorship program. So I'm really hoping to see more Honduran Garifuna writers traditionally published, and I think it'll be a nice game changer. But it's something I'm very passionate about. I'm just passionate about disrupting the entire industry, to be quite honest. Absolutely.
Thank you for that tip of sharing what you about the topic to talk about.
Yeah.
I was just talking to with Elisabet earlier. We were saying how excited we are for Lorraine's book. So we were thinking about our own upbringing and the role of like spirituality, religion, and whether those spaces were oppressive or liberating, and how we've been seeking books to talk about spirituality and alternative and different ways of spirituality. So we've been thinking about those questions. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing up the bathroom.
Yes.
Because I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment. I live with my partner, my 10-year-old, my daughter. I have a 23-year-old daughter. I know I don't care what about.
You're like,
I know. But she comes over with her man all the time. And then I also, it's like a lot. And I'm also a caregiver to my father, who's 70, which is, he's an old Puerto Rican man. And that's a lot to deal with. So I often find myself in the bathroom.
Girl talk, safe space.
Safe space. And I literally make sure that I go around to every room, my 2 bedrooms, my 2 rooms in the style. I'm like, you need to use the bathroom? You need to use the bathroom? You gotta use the bathroom? Because I'm gonna be in there for like 2 hours. So that's part of my writing process.
I love it.
Is making time, because, Bell Hooks has a quote where she says, we have to write against time. And I think that time is one of the things that I used to say, I don't got time. I just don't have the time. And it's like, you're never going to have the time because it's always going to be something. The dish is going to get done. The kid has a crisis at school. Some shit on the news is fucking with you. Something is always going to be, so as part of my writing process is figuring out when to make the time. Another part of my writing process is being kind to myself when I'm not writing. And I think that I'm really proud of the way that I've grown in thinking about my writing process, because I used to be the person who thought that she had to, write every day, or she had to, in order to kind of like be a legitimate writer, whatever that means. And now I'm just like, girl, you out here living the life that you're gonna write about, right? Like everything is inspiration. So in that way, it liberates me, because I don't have to think about like, oh, I'm gonna wait for inspiration. I have to find it. Like it's here, like all of y'all, like this room, right? It's everywhere. And so that liberates me in my writing process. También making time, finding inspiration. I write the things that I'm excited about first, as opposed to thinking about like having a linear like story. And so sometimes a story or an idea will come to me in the middle or towards the end, and I go with that. I don't fight it. I'm not like, oh, well, I don't know how this story starts, so I'm not going to write it. Because, it's okay to start backwards, or it's okay to start from the middle. And I really, really enjoy the process of being excited about the thing that I'm writing about, even if I have no idea where it's going to go, because that the process of discovery is so fascinating to me. And so I always find myself in a space of asking myself, is this story, I don't know, my stories don't come to me figured out. And I have to figure it out. And I like that process of figuring it out. I think that also just speaks to who I am and how I've like grown up. Like, what do we do next? How are we going to figure this out? It's really beautiful to exist in that space of discovery and of wonder. And I just kind of allow myself to get lost in that without judgment. Because things sometimes are going to come out messy. And that's cool.
Oh, there's a beautiful line in the story. There's a picture book, A Sled for Gabo, El Trineo de Gabo by Emma Peggy. And the child, the protagonist, he doesn't have a sled, he doesn't have the winter boots. And the mom said, vamos a resolver. Like, we'll figure it out. And the mom, like, they figure out how you can still go outside, like, his little bag over the boots. Just allowing that problem solved.
We'll figure it out. It's a big thing. My son, so he texts me something. He's 10, but he's like 80. Really, he's like an 85-year-old man. And he texted me like a really long paragraph earlier about some school project and how like he was stressed about like not understanding where he was going and all this stuff. And that was literally my answer. I was like, we'll figure it out, because I was confused. I was like, but there's that faith that you have to have with your writing. I think that it'll figure itself out if you keep asking the right questions of the work.
Oh my, there's so much I'm listening to everyone, and I'm a little triggered by what everyone is saying, like going down the line, the bathroom, the song, everything. So I've been writing my entire adult life since I was in college. I think you asked about, students writing their papers. I was writing papers. I was writing poems for the Friday night open mic in spoken word. And then I was writing for my college's newspaper at Hunter. There was the school newspaper, the Hunter Envoy, and then there was the Blackity Black newspaper, which was the Shield. And I was so into writing. I loved it. I knew what I wanted to do. This was when I reached out to Octavia, but I called her on the phone. I was like, hey. So, I met her. So I was so passionate about writing. I met Edwidge Danticat, which is a Haitian writer. I put myself in places where I was surrounded by writers, and I was writing every day. I know there's a cliche that they tell you. I literally was writing every day, but it wasn't the same project. I would jump around, and this is exactly what I'm doing now as an author. Yes. My brain just, if I am tired of like a prose, a novel, I'll jump to poetry. And if I'm tired of the prose and poetry, I'll do nonfiction essays. And this is how I've written so many different types of books, because I was doing that as a college student, and I never stopped doing that. Every job that I had taken was either teaching writing or writing for the newspaper, and then writing to submit work. I was always chasing $1. Like if there was a contest and there was like a $10 like award, I was there. My first publication was $100 prize, and I was like, yes, food. So this is how I learned to write. And when they asked for something specific, I was able to pivot really quickly, simply because I wanted to be paid for my writing. And I started doing that as a spoken word artist in the late 90s, where open mic nights, they were $50 gift cards to Borders back then, right? And I wanted that $50. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about, hey, somebody place value in what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Tell me if I'm good or not. And I was always seeking those answers and going to writing workshops. So my writing process is chaotic, but it makes sense to me and how my brain works. And it's probably from habit over the years. So no one book of mine is like the other. And I don't care if I don't have like a brand. But every day I'm writing. Like this morning, if I'm thinking about poetry and I could visit a manuscript that's written in verse, and I could visit a nonfiction. So I have nonfiction books that are coming out, novel and verse that are coming out, and novels, fantasy. It's on the surface, it's a mess, but I have people around me who can make sense of it. But overall, it started very early. And you know how they say, like, practice becomes habit? I started early, and it's become habit, and it's become part of my DNA now.
Thank you. I think this is a great time to open up for questions and continue this conversation going. I've heard a little bit about what the stories are about, a little bit on the writing process. I was going to ask about challenges and how you address the challenges, but you all talked about that. Challenges come up all the time. So we'll take a moment to have people think about what you wanted to ask, and I'll walk around with the microphone.
You guys want to ask questions? It's in your face.
Are any of you writers?
Yeah, who's working on something right now? Ooh. A little bit, you want to talk about it yet?
Well, I am.
Yes.
I'm also a teacher here, so I don't have a question. I could say something.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to be corny and be like, this makes me so emotional, but I do really enjoy, so I teach English composition at the undergrad level, and I feel so happy in that classroom, because my classroom is very colorful. Everybody, almost each student has more than one language. So many first generations, immigrants, black and brown faces, accents, so much nuance in that classroom. And then I'm also an MFA student, and it's the opposite. And as much as I adore my classmates, I adore my teachers, I get so much from the program, I get so much from, these sessions and the workshops. It is extremely isolating to be in a room where you don't see yourself or hear yourself. So, they all think of me as like so loud and vibrant and fun and funny and cool and colorful. And I'm like, yeah, I am all those things. But where I come from, we're all those things.
Yeah.
So sitting here and hearing you all speak about things that are just your daily experiences
and how much it is my experience. Like, it is so touching to feel a part of a group, you know, especially in an academic space, which is so dominantly homogenous. You know, Brooklyn College has really created a space where we have the opportunity to be mixed and to see ourselves and to see others and to have these experiences. But, you know, you go to the MFA and it's shocking. It's shocking that I'm in Flatbush and for the last 3 years of the entire program is not a single black student. That I am the blackest, most foreign person in this program is crazy to me. You know, so I just really, I left the class to be here today.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that I did. Thank you so much. I was impressed. And hearing your experiences, it feels like I'm with my cousins. And that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I comment on that? Thank you for sharing that. That was similar to my experience where I took writing workshops at Hunter. And Hunter is similar to what it looks like now. This was 20 years ago. And I really wanted to pursue writing, so I applied to a writing workshop in Seattle. And that was the very first time in my, except for Catholic school, but as an adult, the first time where I was like the only one in a classroom, like surrounded by whiteness. And for me to move ahead, I had to constantly step into those white spaces. Up until now, you know, they are way more diverse like this wasn't the case 10 years ago. And even my MFA program was very, very white. And I felt like I felt like I had to do those things, and it was soul crushing. And for you all are coming up now, like this is a way many of the authors before us, for me to kick down doors and having to be in spaces like that in order to be able to make money from our art. Because we can certainly stay in our like black or brown spaces and self-publish, because I was really thinking about it. Yeah. But, you know, sometimes it means that we don't eat, you know, or we have to work another job. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that. I just want to throw that out there, that proximity to whiteness is sometimes how you attain that success. And some of you, if that's not your experience, please let me know. But I had to like go to, you know, you know, really into spaces to just get through the door.
But something I will say is publishing is white. So if you can make it in your MFA program, you'll have a good setup for making it in publishing, because I think what ends up happening is so many people get in and they're like, oh, I got a book deal, I got it. And they're like, these people are about to get me and blow my book out of the water. They still don't get you. So like everything you're going through in your MFA program is just another lesson for you of like, oh, I got to have thick skin. I got to know that like my story still matters, even if it's going over the head of this white person. My MFA program was the same way. We had instructors of color, which was great, but the actual students who are part of your cohort giving you feedback were all white. And so a lot of, they were like, oh, I don't understand this language. Or, and I was using like AAV, African American vernacular English, and they're like, I don't get it. And I'm like, that's okay. But the reader for this will get it, if I'm using Spanglish, oh, but shouldn't you like put the English word right next to it? I'm like, but why? In fantasy books, they don't do that, right? And so I got to disrupt those, like their comfort level by like challenging them, like, oh, I could see how I should do that, but you didn't do this in your fantasy story. You made up a whole language, so should you tell the reader what? And they were like, oh, that's a good point. I'm like, isn't it? Something for us all to think about. And so sometimes it's like, how do we challenge the whiteness in those spaces, right? Because they're constantly going to attack us and make us feel othered. And I think as someone who works in book publishing, I'm dealing with that every day. And it's so gross, the microaggressions. But also, I like laugh at everything, because I'm like, wow, you really tried that. you really thought you were gonna get away with that, but not with me. I'm gonna like call you out on it in a very professional manner and make you feel uncomfortable. But, I think it was just a masterclass for me, right? I think going in any academic circle, it's mostly white, right? Publishing mostly white, corporate America mostly white, and being from the neighborhoods that I grew up in, like I said in my essay, I didn't see that. I wasn't used to that. And I was like, oh wow, how do I navigate the world being myself around whiteness? And that's really hard. There are so many people who are still struggling with that. I still struggle with it. There are some spaces where I'm like, I'm good. And then there are other spaces where I'm like, wow, I feel really out of place. How do I navigate this? And how do I try and like get my footing, So it doesn't go away. You're not the only one. And I say all of that to like all of the writers out there. Maybe you want to be a writer, maybe you don't, but there's always going to be a white gatekeeper.
And we have a question back here.
I just want to ask you quickly, what about
Actually, a comment.
Oh,
Congratulations, ladies. Congratulations, Ibi. Thank you so much for creating those spaces. Thank you for bringing these important voices to the college to inspire all of us. I don't have a question. I'm just blown away by the brilliance and the diversity of stories within this Blackness, this Black community. So, but also I wanted to add, I think I heard earlier the comment about whether Haiti fits into Latin America. It's oftentimes we have to remind people that Latin America is not a geographic space. It's more connected. It's a linguistic space, and despite the fact that Haitian Creole is syntactically African, its lexicon is very much Latin-based, and therefore Haitians can make the argument that they are Latinx as well. But I'm just fabulously inspired by you and wish you continued success in the work. And Ibi, I hope you can come visit soon. Yes. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so for those who are online or who are not aware here, we have our the Haitian Studies Institute here on our campus, so thank you. Last, before we wrap up, what is next for you? Like, what's your next project? So we heard about the mentorship that's coming up this summer for the Honduran Diaspora writers. Can you share a little bit of what's next, and then we'll get some books to everybody. And we'll start with Lorraine. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Cool. Well, I'm graduating my MFA next month. Sadly, I've been the only Black woman in like years to be in this fully funded program. I was the only person, the only Black woman or woman of visible color, I would say, in like my cohort, and it was really isolating. So I just wanted to quickly speak to that. Like, I would say like the worst part, because yes, I've used it as a way to like, I went to Puerto University. That was my first experience being in a classroom with white people, but like, and I've gone through like 2 masters, but still very much like continue keeping my own company, I guess. And, I would say that like what feels worse about that entire experience is like feeling robbed of like having someone truly like revise and edit your work with the same like careful eye that only we have, because our eye is so extensive because of all the experiences we have. And I would say like I like the people in my program. There's nothing wrong with them. They're chill, but like I just feel like low-key robbed, because every time we would hit like, all right, now I've revised your story, I've given you notes, now you got to look at mine, and it's on some like, they don't know what to say, right? They don't even know how to enter the story, right? And so like, I would say that has been the worst part, and that's why it's so important, like just for everyone generally, like give your story to your friends, like pay your friends, even if it's like $40, like for 10 pages, like it's only the people around you, like at least for me, that's how I have strengthened my own work, is like giving stories to people around me, even when they don't consider themselves writers. It's like, I care about people who don't consider themselves writer. Many a times that's who I'm writing for, like trying to like bring in. And so like, give your stories. You don't need an MFA, as we know from like Elisabet's experience and all of that. Like, you don't need an MFA, and like many a times this is an experience that's happening, which is really sad. So yeah, anyway, I'm graduating my MFA program, and yeah, I've been writing this novel I've been working on for 12 years called Diaspora, and it basically is about a family who has been kind of haunted by this land spirit, who is essentially like seeking revenge and needs like to be embodied by a specific member of this family. And so it's basically like the saga of that entire situation. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. It was a finalist at Tin House, which I think is great. And yeah, that's about it. After my MFA, I really don't know what I'm doing, but I like quit teaching in 2019 and like put all my eggs in my writing basket. And so like, I think I'm gonna be great regardless.
Yes.
So.
Yes. All gonna support your book.
Yeah, so speak to that, I went to college. I don't have an MFA, but I did go to art school in Baltimore, the Maryland Institute College of Art, which is like a very fancy, schmancy art school, even though it's in Baltimore, a predominantly black city. I think until like the 60s or so, like black people weren't even allowed to go to the school. And then the one person that did go dropped out, and then another black person didn't enter the school until like the 90s, the 2000s. So it has like a really interesting history. And also, like in my program, the graphic design program, I had like only one female black friend or two who were like black, and then there was only one black male in the entire department. And I didn't realize until like we started the senior year, and then he said that. I was just like, oh shit, you're right, they all dropped out. It was just like him left. And I was just like, yeah, this is embarrassing for the school. But we had what we would call the room of silence, which is, we were critiquing visual arts, so it's a little different, but it was that same phenomenon of like, you just like, it gets to your turn in the critique, and then all of a sudden it's like silence. People are just like, interesting or whatever, and they're like, they're like, oh, I feel like I don't know enough about that culture, so I don't know like enough to like tell you something about it or whatever. I'm just like, can you like talk about the technique, like the colors, like what do you think about it, what does it make you feel? And there, it's just like this like block that would happen. So we would just get together in the Diversity Center and like host critique groups called like the Room of the Room of Silence. Particularly speaking to that, where it was just all of the 10, 15 of us in the entire school all just like talking to each other and critiquing our work, because again, we were not getting our money's worth in terms of like getting feedback and having the full experience in that way. So that was my experience with it. I'm still like working through, because I never considered myself a writer until I just like, sort of fell into getting a book published, but I'm still, figuring out stuff. I feel like people think because like I have a book that I know what I'm doing. It's like I don't. I need like help and people to like read my work and do that kind of stuff. In terms of what I have next, my next book is called The Girl with the Ring and the Baseball Bat. It's my first novel, so it was a little bit different process in writing and a lot harder, I guess, in terms of the fact that like I had to think about the full scope of like a full story all at once, and it was kind of like, if it's like a painting like that, I have to like zoom out even further than I would for like a short story to sort of get a grasp on it. So it's supposed to come out this fall. We'll see. I have like edits that are due this week, so I'm just like trying to finish it. So like to a next project maybe. I feel like me and Lorraine have weird synchronicity in terms of things that we do. Like she put out a short story collection called Montreal. You guys should pop that as well. But for her book, Yolanda, The Making of Yolanda La Bruja, I was telling her the character in my story, who's like this older aunt figure. Her name is Yolanda, and like she does like brujeria and is like bruja. And I was like, I swear I'm not copying. But yeah, my book also takes place in high school. It's set in Jersey City. So I kind of wanted to sort of shout out Jersey and like the experience like growing up there, and my high school, which is the most overpopulated high school in New Jersey, and it was a very interesting experience. I think it was also one of the most linguistically diverse places in the country, like top 5 or something. So yeah, I would walk through the halls and no one speaking English. Everyone was just speaking a different language. And it's set in like 3 different characters. So we have Rosie, we have her sister Carol, and we have another character, Zeke, and how they each sort of find a different talisman or object that helps them in their own like personal journeys. Rosie's being like a jacket that gets people to do whatever she wants, which is for me a lot of my trauma from college and like not being able to speak to admin people to get these scholarships and so that I could go to school. Definitely poured into her character. There's Zeke, who has a ring that makes people. He sort of plays Cupid and makes people fall in love and like trying to sort of deal with his own grief and like learning different forms of love and how that might be. And then we have Carol, who's seen as sort of like a girl with like anger issues, loosely based on my brother, who would get into a lot of fights as a kid. And she finds a baseball bat that fixes the things that it breaks every time that she breaks it. So yeah, so each of them sort of going through that and then maybe overthrowing school, maybe the tagline is like maybe sometimes violence is the answer, and so that's what I was sort of playing with that book. But excited to see it come out. So, get some feedback from
another translation by Thank you so much.
I have 2 anthologies that I'm in. One I edited that's coming out next year. It's the Black girl survives in this one. It's all horror stories where the Black girl survives at the end because we need more Black final girls. And then I'm in a Latinx fantasy and myth retelling that's coming out. I wrote about Goldilocks because I'm obsessed with Goldilocks. But I also don't know if people will get the story, so we'll see because it's a Goldie vampire story. So I'm excited for both of those. They're landing in 2024. And then I'm working on a series of essays which might turn into a memoir now. I don't really know. And then I just finished a picture book, so that was really fun.
I just sold my second book. I feel like it took forever. But it is a dystopian novel in verse about a society that rewards its citizens for forgetting. And so it's exciting, but it's also like what we're living in now. Yeah. And then I'm working on a poetry collection that is talking about Puerto Rican history, but like the format is reality television. And so I'm a huge reality television like buff. It just helps me to not think about life. It allows me to zone out. And so I was thinking about what would it look like to have a poetry collection formatted in like the shows that I love, like Top Chef. And, what does that look like in terms of food and Puerto Rican history, or Love is Blind, and what that looks like in terms of the colonial relationship that folks often like to romanticize, with the United States and Puerto Rico. And so I'm really excited. That's something that is, I don't know where it's going to go, but it's a passion project of mine. And then just staying alive and trying to to not give myself any pressures that are not, just trying to be kind to myself is what I'm trying to say.
That's important.
A few months before the second Black Panther came out, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it was a big moment for Haitian people toward the end, if you saw it. So before that, I had sold my next picture book on Haiti, called The People Will Rise, the story of Haiti, first free Black republic. And there had not been anything about Haiti in general ever. There's one about Toussaint Louverture, traditionally published, about Toussaint Louverture by Walter Dean Myers, and using artwork by Jacob Lawrence. And that was in the 90s. So this is the first picture book. And I had to write 2,000 words. It's poetry. Haitian history in 2,000 words. Hardest thing to ever do.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot that our heroes are not necessarily noble. And I learned a lot about Dominican Republic, you know, and their relationship. So while Haiti is like, you know, they're anti-French, Dominican Republic is like anti-Haitian. We understand. I understand now. They were trying to copy y'all. I get it.
But not really. We ask for help sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know, they were trying to colonize. You know, if you don't, coupe tete boule kind means cut heads, burn houses. Like that was the Revolutionary War cry. But I had like a professor tell me another understanding of that. You cut off your own head, the colonized head, and burn your house, the plantation that still exists even when you burn down the physical plantation. So a lot of the revolutionary heroes were mimicking colonizer ways. They had no other way to rule a country. How do I write that in a picture book for 5-year-olds or something?
Right.
I think I did that. So that's the next project. We just have to find Haitian artists. You know, I'm on the look for my publisher's looking for Haitian artists.
Wow. I'm going to refer one.
Yes, please. Yes.
The one who did Days with Edward is in New York.
Yes, I just found them out. Yeah, I just found them out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Because of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first round of applause for all the teachers. Like everyone said, phenomenal, inspiring, we all book. And so I'm going to do a little wrap up, and then I'm going to say, everyone, if you can grab 2 books. I know there were still questions. Shania, I saw your hand up there. You can come, you know, ask and we'll chat away. So where we go from here? You can check out our courses. This will all be all over social media where you can delve into these topics. So whether it's your intro courses, talk about the arts, talk about diaspora, there's a Caribbean literature course. And there are some award scholarship information. Please do not leave without that information here. Don't forget, the Wolf Institute has all of these sessions that they've been having in series. If you made it to the Barbara Smith event last week, amazing. If you didn't, they're all archived on their YouTube. Don't forget, we have the CUNY Haitian Studies Institute, a lot of events that they've put out in the past and upcoming. So thank you for that representation and work. Thank you to our authors, and let's keep in touch. So thank you, everyone. Please, we'll make our way to grab some books, thank our authors, and have a great rest of your day.
We need a picture.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.